Welcome to another session of the online lecture series being organized by the Department of English, University of Gour. In today's session, we have in our midst Professor Amzed Hossein, who will talk about T.S. Eliot's important poem, Four Quartets. Before I request Professor Hossein to make his presentation, I have a few things to tell you. Please mute your microphones. Only the speaker's microphone will be kept unmuted. Don't share your screen or keep your video on. Okay, thank you. Now Professor Amzed Hossein is going to deliver his lecture on T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. So it's over to Amzed bhai.
Okay. Good evening, everybody.
Good
evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Today we are going to. Hello.
Yes, you are
Hello.
audible.
Can I start?
Hello.
Yes, please start.
Yes. So, yes. Good evening, everybody. Today I'm going to give sort of introduction to Four Quartets by T.S. Eliot. And now, the Four Quartets, as you can understand from the title, consists of four poems: Burnt Norton, East Coker, The Dry Selvages, and Little Gidding. Now, the poem was published, the book of poems, Four Quartets, was published in 1944, but each quartet was published separately. For instance, the first quartet, that is Burnt Norton, was published in 1935. It was composed almost as a separate poem. And then in 1940, Eliot published East Coker. And then in 1941, The Dry Selvages. And 1942, the Little Gidding, the last quartet, was published. And then, apparently, although these poems were published separately, but when we look at the text of Four Quartets as a whole, we find that there is a clear plan. There is a kind of similarity of structure in each quarters. For instance, each quartet consists of 5 sections or 5 movements, 5 parts. They are numbered as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Now, the term quartets is borrowed from music. A quartet is a kind of musical composition for 4 voices or 4 musical instruments. Now, Eliot in 1942, in an essay called The Music of Poetry, talked about the composition of a poem on the analogy of a kind of sonata or symphony. I'm reading this portion briefly. There are possibilities for verse which bear some analogy to the development of a theme by different groups of instruments. Different groups of, that is at least 4 instruments. There are possibilities of transitions in a poem comparable to the different movement of a symphony or a quartet. There are possibilities of a contrapuntal arrangement of subject matter. Now, obviously, you see, his idea is that as in a kind of composition for 4 musical instruments, there are variations in the musical notations of the instruments. But in poetry, how can he achieve these different, say, musical notations created by different musical instruments? Now, one way of doing this is the variation of tone, variation of rhythm, the vocabulary, the speed, etc. of the treatment of hymns. Sometimes it can be very slow, meditative, sometimes it can be very brisk. So in this way, through variations and repetitions of the major themes, perhaps he could create this analogy between a sonata and a poem like the Quartets. Now, we can then look at, as I was saying, the structure of each quartet. There are 5 sections. We can use the musical term movement. Now, each of these movements have a kind of similarity in all the quartets. For instance, in the first movement, usually we find that the first movements of all the quartets deal with different conceptions of time. And he, achieves a kind of sort of unity, insight into time. And then in the second movement, suddenly he feels that perhaps what he discovered in the first movement is lost, and as a result, he tries to recount that experience and recounts to understand, to reach a new understanding of the thing. And then at the end of the second movement, we find that as if he reaches kind of new insights. And then in the third movement, he explores these new insights in a combination of journey metaphors and also reflections of spiritual states of purgation and selflessness. The fourth movement, in the fourth movements of all the quartet, the speaker ponders and prays, and the theme is presented in a kind of Christian formulation. And in the first quartet, for instance, the fourth movement is a prayer to God the Father as the unmoved mover. We will explain these things a little bit. And in the second quartet, that is East Coker, the fourth movement is a prayer to God the Son as Redeemer. And in the third quartet, the speaker prays to Virgin Mary as the intercessor. That is, she is requested to pray on behalf of the people. And then the final quartets, God the Holy Spirit is presented as the voice and power of love. And in the final, movement, the fifth movement, we find a kind of returning to the opening conceptions. And also he reaches a kind of determination. He reaches some sort of insights, and these are presented with a recapitulation with what he began the quartet. Now this structure, this fivefold structure, as we find in the Westland also, there were these kinds of fivefold structure, so has a kind of similarity with what is called the various stages of a mystic's journey to the union, to his union with God. Now, Evelyn Underhill, in her book Mysticism, describes these journeys of the mystic And she speaks of the 5 stages of the mystic's journey to this union with God, this kind of mystical awareness, mystical realization of God. And they have a kind of similarity. These stages have a similarity with what T.S. Eliot is doing in the 5 movements of the 4 quartets. Now, Underhill speaks of these 5 stages. The first stage, for instance, in a mystic's journey, is an awakening to divine reality. Awakening to divine reality, which is marked by joy and exaltation. And then the second stage, we find that, the mystic realizes a sort of imperfection in him, and then he attempts to eliminate all that stands in the way of progress to God through discipline and through, mortification. And then in the third stage, the mystic's journey, there is a kind of purgation of all impurities, and that brings a kind of illumination. So the next stage actually presents a purification of the self. And finally, in the 5th stage, the mystic achieves the union. It is the establishment of life upon a kind of transcendental level. So it is, Eliot, after his conversion in 1927 to Anglo-Catholicism, was perhaps looking for this kind of mystical union with God, and trying to present his realizations, his feelings, his emotions in the form of a religious poem. And 4 quartets is a kind of supreme achievement of that aim. Now, I think we shall briefly discuss the main ideas of the progress of thoughts in each of the quartets. What is the central theme of the 4 quartets? Now, the central theme of the 4 quartets can be explained as a sort of, the poet's attempt of union of, human time with God's time. Now, this seems to be very abstract, or, in another way, one critic has presented it as, the union of the flux of time with God's timelessness. God is timeless, and how in our daily life we can have a perception of God, realization of the timelessness in time. That is the main subject of quest in the 4 quartets. But also there are some sub-themes. For instance, he also meditates on history, on poetry, on love and faith. And he also tries how these things, history, poetry, love, faith, can be transfigured with a kind of divine illumination. So these are the basic things. Now, in the first quartet, Burnt Norton, we find first quartet, first movement, Eliot presents an experience of a kind of mystical vision. He describes a rose garden. Now, I must perhaps tell you about the title. Burnt Norton is a kind of manor house which was burnt in Gloucestershire in England. Eliot visited this manor house with a kind of formal garden. There is a beautiful, big, large garden, and he visited it in 1934 with his friend Emily Hell. And then perhaps, he used Burnt Norton as a sort of setting for his meditation on time. Now there, he is speaking about a kind of illumination, mystic illumination in the garden. There we find as if a bard is the guide of the speaker. The bard says, quick, said the bard, find them round the corner. And ultimately, this is what happens. This is the description of the vision in concrete terms. So we moved in response to the bard's call. So we moved, and they, in a formal pattern, along the empty alley into the box circle to look down into the drained pool. Then this vision occurs. Dry the pool, dry concrete, brown-edged, and the pool was filled with water out of sunlight. So, yes, the pool of water was empty, dry, but suddenly, as sunlight fell into the dry pond, as if it appeared the pond is filled with water, and the lotus rose quietly, the surface glittered out of heart of light. Now, this was a rose garden, and suddenly in this rose garden, in the empty dry pond, he had the vision of a lotus that rose quietly. Now, you see, rose garden in Christian as well as in many other mystic poetry, particularly Persian mystic poetry, rose garden symbolizes union of man's union with God. The lotus also is a symbol in, say, Indian, Buddhist, and Hindu mythology also, as such a, which suggests a symbol of such a vision of God. So there, in a sudden moment, the poet had this experience of this illumination, and then, but this vision of the lotus could not be sustained, as we find. The poet next moment says, then a cloud passed and the pool was empty. So the cloud passed, the sunlight vanished, the sun was covered, and the pool was again empty. Go, said the bard, for the leaves were full of children, hidden excitedly, containing laughter of children within the garden, which the poet cannot see, but whom the poet cannot see. The children could not be seen, but he could listen to their laughter, suppressed laughter. But the bard says, go, said the bard. Humankind cannot bear very much reality. This vision of the lotus, which, suggests a kind of illumination or a kind of union with God, if we say, then this vision cannot be sustained. This is a kind of transitional vision, fugitive vision. It passes away as soon as the vision is seen. And then, the poet says, as if human beings are incapable of sustaining this kind of vision. Now, what is the significance of this vision? In the first part of the Burnt Notum, the first movement of Burnt Notum, you will see Eliot presents some philosophical ideas in very abstract terms. Time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future, and the time future content in time past, etc. He speaks of the time as past, present, future, but then you see, all time, if we think of time as simultaneity, all time is present in God's consciousness, etc. Now, we'll discuss these things a little bit later, but that vision is a moment in this continuous flux of time. Time is a flux. Flux means something which is always moving and changing. Now, in this movement and change of time, suddenly there is the vision of the lotus in the rose garden and the laughter of the children. Now, this moment is memorable. Now, what is this kind of moment? This kind of vision, this what we are saying in, kind of abstract terms, the union of man with God, or union of time with timelessness. Now, we can give an example. For instance, in time of crisis, in times of, say, disease, in times of danger, for instance, we often try to pray to God. Particularly, look, for instance, in the present time of pandemic, we are all afraid and we sometimes try to pray to God, oh God, save us. Now, during this prayer, if it happens that we, for instance, for a brief moment, maybe for a fraction of a second, we forget whatever is happening around us, our daily lives, the sounds around us, the fears, etc. And we become one with God, one with to whom we are praying. Now that moment, is almost equivalent to what is presented here as the vision of the lotus. Now, this moment in the flux of time is a still point. In the next movement, second movement of Banga Norton, Eliot then speaks about this still point. At the still point of the turning world, the still point, which is the stable, which is the fixed point in the flux of time. Now, this is what Eliot is trying to describe, how we can reach that still point, the oneness with this timelessness. There are some philosophical ideas, which can be explained with the help of Aristotle, the help of Heraclitus, etc. But we will go into those discussions a little later. But what Eliot is saying, how he is describing the still point. At the still point of the turning world, neither flesh nor fleshless, neither from nor towards, at the still point, there the dance is, but neither arrest nor movement, and do not call it fixity, where past and future are gathered. Neither movement from nor towards, neither ascent nor decline, except the point, the still point. In this way it goes on. He describes it as erebang, or exaltation, or a kind of elevation without motion, concentration without elimination, etc. So what Eliot was saying in the first part, time past and time future, that is human time, human life is guided by the past, present and future. But then suddenly in this flow of flux of past, present, future, we have this experience of the turning point within time. But it's not that, this moment, of course, is a moment of heightened joy, this unity with God, but then it is not outside time. No, it is outside time, but also within time. Because when we are in the flux of time, suddenly, with a kind of poetic imagination, we can have this kind of vision of the still point. And so in the second movement ends with this line, only through time, time is conquered. Now the third movement of Banga Norton speaks of time of our daily life, of this world, not of the vision as vision of the lotus in the rose garden, as he described in the first movement. As he starts, here is a place of disaffection. This world, our daily life in this world is moving with a kind of disaffection. Disaffection can mean political disloyalty. It can be spiritual discontent. Time before and time after in dim light. We are thinking of the past, we are thinking of the future. Our life has no rest. Restlessness marks our life. Neither delight, investing form with lucid stillness. Daylight can give a sort of beauty to earthly things, but we don't have also that kind of perception of beauty. nor darkness to purify the soul. Nor there is the darkness, the spiritual darkness, which can ultimately be illuminated by spiritual light, spiritual realization. That is also not there. What kind of life we lead here? Eliot says, distracted from distraction by distraction. So this is our life. We are distracted from the main goal. All around us there are distractions, and we are distracted by all sorts of distractions. The central meaning of our life has as if disappeared from this world of disaffection, and this is happening everywhere. He names the places: driven on the wind that sweeps the gloomy hills of London, Hampstead and Clerkenwell, Clampden and Putney, Highgate, Primrose and Ludgate, etc. And then he comes as if to a new realization. So how can we achieve or get liberation from this distraction, from distraction by distraction? The last part of the third movement here, he speaks of another way. There is one way of spiritual illumination, which is poetic, which is sudden, which can be achieved with a kind of imaginative feat. But then there is another way, the way that is described by the Spanish mystic Saint John of the Cross, a 16th century Spanish mystic. In a poem called The Dark Night, or usually it is also called The Dark Night of the Soul, he talks about this darkness, and he explains this poem, Dark Night, in his book called The Ascent of Mount Carmel. Now, Mount Carmel, as if is the seat of God, and how a mystic can reach that height. And what is the way? He says, to reach the Mount Carmel there, we have to go down. And this is what is presented here in this part of the poem. Descend lower, descend only into the world of perpetual solitude, world not world, but that which is not world, internal darkness, deprivation and destitution of all property. Desiccation is the drying up of all the world of sense. World of sense means we have to, take ourselves away from things that we love, the love of our love of worldly things. Evacuation of the world of fancy. We have to, evacuate our soul of the fanciful ideas in our mind. Inoperancy of the world of spirit, and we have to think about the redemption. This is the one way. This is one way, the going down, descending. Descending means evacuation or emptying our soul of all the impurities that are there, all the greed, all the attachment to earthly things, etc. And when we will be able to empty our soul of all that is not God, that is, impurities, then maybe we can have a vision of God, we can be united with God, we can reach Mount Carmel, the house of God, etc. So this is the one way. This is the way of the saint. And the other is the same. And the other way, that is the sudden illumination that he spoke of in the first movement, is another way. And actually, he says that the other way are the same. In the epigraph, Eliot quotes from Heraclitus, the pre-Socratic Greek philosopher. He says the way up and the way down are one and the same. Now, what are the way up and the way down? Heraclitus has a conception of the, conception of all the material world, consisting of the earth, the air, water, and fire. And he believes that there is always a kind of conflict or a kind of strife among these four elements. And there is a kind of transmutation taking place always. So one kind of transmission is this, that the earth ultimately will transmute into air, then air will turn into fire, water, and then into fire. So the journey, the transmutation, the way of transmutation from earth to fire is the way up, and then from fire, then to water, then to air, and to the earth. This is the way down. But the transmutation of that is taking place among these elements continuously are the same, whether it is the way up or the way down. The cyclical change is the same. Now, Eliot, many critics or many scholars have interpreted that perhaps Heraclitus suggested this kind of transmutation, cyclic transmutation, is Heraclitus regarded as logos. Now, this logos is a kind of cycle, you see, and Eliot also took up this idea with a little bit of change. He thought that although it is continuously changing, but in this logos, you see, there all the movement, all the change are gathered at a particular place, and that is the still point. So basically, when all things are changing, but the change of the logos, this wheel of change, can be gathered at a one particular point, which will be the still point, which will be the unchanging. So Eliot uses the idea of Heraclitus, but then perhaps he infuses the Christian idea here and creates this image. So here he talks about, you see, the descending lower, the way down, and another way of joyfulness, the exaltation which he described in the first part, the way up. Both are the same. And therefore, he concludes that section, while the world moves in appetency of time past, time future, etc., they are basically, it is one kind of cycle, one cyclical movement. Now we come to the fourth part, the fourth movement. It is a kind of prayer, a kind of lyrical prayer. He has, the poet wonders here, will the sunflower turn to us? Will the clematis stray down, bend to us? Now sunflower and the clematis, which is a kind of plant, here represent the Christ and the Virgin Mary. Will they turn to us? Will we be redeemed? This kind of light to light, and the light is still at the still point of the turning world. So maybe if the light of the kingfisher's wing reflects light, that is, there is a kind of illumination, then maybe we will find the still point in the turning world. And the final section of the burnt noten brings in the other themes, sub-themes of four quartets. That is what I mentioned about history, poetry, faith, belief, etc. Now here he talks about words, which refers to poetry. Now words move, music moves only in time, but that which is only living can only die. Words after speech reach into silence. Now he is meditating on poetry. Now poetry is something as religious experience, say a religious experience or union with God can give us the idea of the still point, a kind of stability, perfection. Similarly, words or the rhythms in music, for instance, which depends on time, ultimately can reach a kind of timelessness by a form. That is what he says. Only by the form, the pattern, can words or music reach the stillness. That is, words outside the form is subject to flux, change. As he says, say, after the speech, words reach silence. They vanish, they disappear, they forget. But words can be given a kind of permanence by the help of the poetic form, artistic form. Say he gives the example of Chinese jar. as a Chinese jar still moves perpetually in its stillness. Now, Chinese jar or the Grecian urn, for instance, you see, has a form, and it is immortal. It is permanent. So when words are gathered by the poets, given a pattern, given a shape, given a form, an eidos or a kind of paradigm, a particular form, words also can become the still point, can become permanent. So this is how he talks about this pattern that can be achieved in the field of arts. And then finally, in the final movement of final part of this movement, again he recapitulates what he talked about, the vision in the first part of first movement of Bernd Norton. There is a recapitulation. Again, he talks about those ideas. Even while the dust moves, there rises the hidden laughter of children in the foliage. Quick, now, here, now, ridiculous, the waste of time stretching before and after. So again, those images come back, a kind of reminder of that vision. Now, therefore, you see, in this quartet, Eliot, as you see, thinks of time and the timelessness, how we can achieve unity with the timelessness in a kind of spiritual illumination, either in a kind of illumination which is joyful, but that cannot be sustained for long. It is transient, it is fugitive. And so there is another way, which is the way of descent, that is emptying our soul from all that is not God, all that is not spiritual, and then maybe descending lower and lower through the darkness. Ultimately, we can discover the light of God. So these are the two ways that he speaks. And as a poet, he's not only here talking about a kind of religious quester, religious searcher. Since Eliot is a poet also, he also thinks about how poetry can be given this kind of permanence. The medium of poetry is obviously words, or you see the medium of music are the rhythms. So how art can be given a permanent form. Form can give permanence to words. This is what he speaks about in the final part of the first quartet. Then the next quartet is Wistkoker. Now, title is taken from a name of a village in Somersetshire. Actually, Eliot's family, Andrew Eliot, for instance, in the 16th, 17th century, migrated to America from this village. Now look, this is how it begins. In my beginning is my end. In my beginning is my end. Well, this has been given many meanings. Now, in one way, you can say that every end is a kind of beginning. Say, Eliot's family started from this village, so their stay ended here, but it was another beginning, another life in America. But then other meanings are there. For instance, when man is born, there is, his death is already there, included in his birth. And similarly, when one reaches a sort of ending, death, well, that death included his birth also, because you see, it is the fulfillment of the life. So birth ultimately reached death, and death contains the birth. As when one is born, so birth also ultimately contains death, because that is the inevitable end of human life. So he here talks about the beginning. He, again, like that first part of of Burnt Norton, as he spoke about a vision, here also we find he talks about a vision. You see, now the light falls across the open field. Light falls across the open field, leaving the deep lane, etc. It is going to be evening. In a warm haze, sultry light is absorbed, and then suddenly when light has gone, and wait for the early owl, that is, it is night time, and suddenly he has this vision. In that open field, if you do not come too close on a summer midnight, you can hear the music of the wick pipe and the little drum, and see them dancing around the bonfire, the association of man and woman in dancing, signifying matrimony, a dignified and commodious sacrament. Now, if you look at the spelling of in dancing, signifying matrimony, you will find that the spelling is of 16th century spelling. Dancing is spelled as D-A-U-N-S-I-N-G-E. Matrimony is, again, there is a final E, N-I-E. Dignified and commodious sacrament. 2 and 2 necessary conjunction. Conjunction is spelled as C-O-N-I, etc., which is another form of J. So this is a 16th century vision. As in the first part, Burnt Norton, his vision was in a private garden of the manor house. Here, he has a vision of the village commons, where you see people are dancing. This is the way of life of the 16th century. This is taken from the book of Governor by Sir Thomas Eliot. This description of the dancing, celebration of matrimony, etc. It was published in 1530. Now, Sir Thomas Eliot was another forefather of another ancestor of Eliot. So he has described this vision, and then along with this vision goes on the meditations of time. This dancing is also a kind of keeping time, keeping the rhythm, but not only the say past or present time, but he speaks of bigger times like the time of season, all in their living, in the living seasons, the time of the seasons and the constellations, the time of milking and the time of harvest, the time of coupling of man and woman, and that of beasts, feet rising and falling. So yes, in the 16th century, that was the way of life. But what happened to that? They all came to death, dung and death. Down points, another day prepares the heat and silence. Out at sea, the dawn wind wrinkles and slides. So after the midnight, the dawn wind blows and the vision vanishes, and Eliot finds that I am here or there or elsewhere in my beginning. Eliot visited this village in 1936, and so he visited because it was the village from which his ancestors went. So as if they ended their existence there and started a new beginning, but then Eliot again came back to that end. So this is his end. Now at present, after a kind of cyclical movement, he has reached this beginning. Now then, in the second part of the second movement, you see he talks about again how these experiences can be presented in the form of poetry. That was a way of putting it, not very satisfactory, a periphrastic study in a worn-out poetical fashion. He's not satisfied the way he's trying to express these ideas in his poetry, leaving one still with the intolerable wrestle with words and meanings. It's a writing poetry is a kind of intolerable wrestle with words and meanings. The poetry does not matter. It was not to start again what one had expected, what was to be the value of the long looked forward to, long hoped for come the autumnal serenity and the wisdom of age. Had they deceived us? Had they deceived themselves? Or the quiet-voiced elders bequeathing us merely a receipt for deceit, etc. So in this way he goes on, and again it comes to the end with the kind of realization that he speaks here, that you see, the only wisdom we can hope to acquire is the wisdom of humility. Humility is endless. Now, the experience actually does not give us any kind of, pure knowledge, because experience always are changing. So, you see, the houses are all gone under the sea. The dancers are all gone under the sea. The houses, the dancers, all have vanished. So, although he is thinking of his ancestors here, of his family, racial origin, in a way, not just private experience as he described in the first quartet, but then ultimately he realizes that this racial history can only ultimately lead to the realization that the real wisdom is humility. Humility is endless. And then the third movement, you see, he again speaks of the pain of life in this world. Oh, dark, dark, dark. Now this has an echo of Samson Agonistis. Samson Agonistis died in this way, oh, dark, 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 in the blaze of noon. So they go all into the dark. Then, as he said in the earlier section also, he describes that everything ends in death. They go all into the dark, the vacant interstellar spaces, etc. Who are they? Now they are the leaders of the society, the captains, merchant bankers, eminent men of letters, the generous patrons of art, the statesmen of rulers, etc., etc. He describes these all go with them to the funeral. So, in this kind of situation, when death is the reality in this world, then soul, to his soul, he said, I said to my soul, be still and wait without hope. Be still, be calm and quiet and wait without hope. Waiting is the only way, and we have to wait without hope. For hope would be hope for the wrong thing. Hope would be hope for the wrong thing, because we are not yet pure. We're not yet been able to purify our soul. So wait without love, for love would be the love of wrong thing. There is yet faith. We are not yet prepared for the realization, so we have to wait without hope, without faith, without love. Ultimately, maybe if we wait, if we have patience, then the darkness shall be the light and the stillness the dancing. And then he says, so I am repeating something I have said before. Now, he refers to again the way down by St. John of the Cross. But he says, yes, I shall say it again. Shall I say it again? Then he again, in a way, paraphrases some of the ideas of St. John of the Cross here. In order to arrive there, to arrive where you are, to get from where you are not, you must go by way wherein there is no ecstasy. Where is no ecstasy? You have to go down. You have to, suffer deprivation. In order to arrive at what we do not know, you must go by a way which is the way of ignorance. You have to, again, as he said in the earlier times, evacuate your mind of all knowledge of this earthly knowledge. In order to possess what you do not possess, you must go by way of dispossession. You have to, dispossess of all your earthly possessions. Only then perhaps you can reach there. And then the fourth movement, again, it is a kind of prayer, like all the fourth movements of all the quartets. Here, you see, in a very symbolic language, he refers to Christ. The wounded surgeon plies the steel. Wounded surgeon refers to Christ, the crucified Christ. The questions that questions the distempered part. Beneath the bleeding hands, we feel the sharp compassion of the healer's art. Yes, Christ suffered, but that is for only our healing. Resolving the enigma of the fever chart. The fever chart is a reference to the disorder of human existence. Now, the human disorder can be only cured through Christ. Our only health is the disease if we obey the dying nurse. Now, the dying nurse here symbolizes the church. So our health can be only restored if we obey the church, whose constant care is not to please, but to instruct us, but to remind us of Adam's curse. Adam's curse is the original sin, the eating of the apple, and that to be restored, our sickness must grow worse. Our sickness must grow worse means we must go through the purgatorial suffering. As you know, purgatory in the Catholic Christian scheme is a place where man is purified through suffering. So, this purified suffering for purification is necessary. Our sickness must grow worse. Now, the whole earth is a kind of hospital. The whole earth is our hospital, endowed by the ruined millionaire. Now, ruined millionaire might refer to Adam. He gave us this world, but he was ruined by his sin. So, wherein, if we do well, we shall die of the absolute paternal care. And finally, in the last stanza of the fourth section, he refers to the mass, the eating of Christ's flesh and Christ's blood, the symbolism of the spiritual food which can redeem us. The dripping blood, our only drink; the bloody flesh, our only food. So Christ's body and Christ's blood can save us symbolically. This is the spiritual food which can save us. But in spite of which, we like to think that we are sound, substantial flesh and blood. Now, in this world, we think that without the food, spiritual food, without flesh and blood of Christ, we can perhaps remain sound, healthy, substantial. This is the secular idea of redemption. This is the secular philosophy that leads us. But Eliot says that it is not possible. Again, in spite of that, we call this Good Friday good. Now, Good Friday refers to, the anniversary of Christ's, crucifixion. So only through purgatorial suffering can we regain our health. This is what is being suggested by taking the care of church, the guidance of church, and by Christ, we can be redeemed. And then the fifth part is a kind of recapitulation of the ideas already presented here. As for instance, in the last part here, it says home is where it starts from. As we grow older, the world becomes stranger, patterns more complicated, dead living, the beginning and the end, etc. And then finally, he just reverses with which what we began. In my end is my beginning. Now, this is a motto which was used by Queen Mary. In my end is my beginning is a kind of religious expression. That is, when someone dies, the real life begins. That is what is the Christian belief, that our life on this earth is a kind of dream, is a kind of illusion. After death, life truly begins. So in my end is my beginning. This is how the poem ends. The second quartet. Now, the dry salvages, Eliot mentions here in the text itself, is a small group of rocks with a beacon, with a lighthouse off the northeast coast of Cape Ann, Massachusetts. Now, Eliot spent his childhood there. He visited the sea of the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of Massachusetts, and perhaps he also visited the dry salvages, the rock. And then in the first part of this, he describes the river, the Mississippi River. I do not know much about gods, but I think that the river is a brown god. Now, the river here symbolizes the primitive savagery within man. And then he describes the sea also, the Atlantic Sea. The sea is a reservoir of all sorts of world's evolution. The sea is much greater than the river, obviously, because the sea cannot be subdued. It cannot be mapped. Although, but on the other hand, the bridge has been built on the river. Sometimes the river is, there is an illusion that man can control the river, although the river can create flood begins. I think the second part and coming to the third movement of dry salvages. Here, you see, Eliot begins in this way. I sometimes wonder if that is what Krishna meant. Among other things, or one way of putting the same thing, that the future is a faded song, a royal rose or a lavender spray of wistful regret for those who are not yet here to regret, pressed between yellow leaves of a book that has never been opened. Now, this is what Krishna meant, Krishna said. What is that story? As you know, all Krishna, you see, admonished Arjuna during the battle, in the battlefield, in the Mahabharata. Krishna, Arjuna, when Arjuna was, you see, reluctant to fight because he found on the other side among the enemies all his relatives, Bhishma, Drona, his teacher, and his brothers, etc. So how can I kill them? That was the question. But then, you see, Krishna counseled him that, your right is only on work. You need not think of the future. Karmanye badhikarasti ma phaleshu kadacham. It's a very famous sentence, karmani eva adhikarasti. That you should perform your duty, your karma. Karmani is plural of karma, of works. And you should not think about the fruits. Ma phaleshu. Don't think about the fruit. Because you see, it is your duty to do, because you have no control over the future. You are here to perform your duty. So as a soldier, as a Kshatriya belonging to the Kshatriya caste, it is your duty to fight. Don't think about the past. Now, here Eliot presents these words in his own way, among other things, that the future is a faded song. The future is a faded song. Future you do not know. What you are thinking, what will happen in the future has not yet happened. So you are not to, and future is inevitable. Everything, in the first part of Bant, not only spoke about the simultaneity of time. So in God, the past, the present, the future, what might have been, all exist in a, in a simultaneous order. And everything will happen. You as a human being has no control over what will happen in the future. You have no idea. The future has not yet taken place. So why should that thought of future will stop you from, performing your duties in the present? So that future is a faded song, a royal rose or a lavender, whatever it might be, of wistful regret for those who are not yet here to regret. Now maybe in future, if you are arguing that you have to kill your relatives and then you will regret, but that is in the future. Those things have not yet happened. You have not yet reached there. So this kind of wistful regret for, there is no cause for regret. So why should you not perform your duty? So that is what you have to do. Don't think of the future. Go on doing your duty. This is what he, in the last part of the section, he says, which shall fructify. If you do your duty, then this shall fructify in the lives of others. These will make others' lives fruitful. If you perform your duties in the present, it will make your lives also fruitful. And do not think of the fruit of action. Again, almost the same paraphrase of Karmani eva adhikaroste ma phaleshu kadachana. So farewell, O voyagers. This is how then he ends this section. This is not only spoken about Arjuna, but this is applicable to all men. O voyagers, O seamen, you who come to port, and you whose bodies will suffer the trial and judgment of the sea, whatever the event, this is your real destination. So Krishna, as when he admonished Arjuna on the field of battle, not farewell, but fare forward, voyagers. This is how this section in the fourth part again is a kind of prayer. You see, the poet addresses lady, which is Virgin Mary, lady whose shrine stands on the promontory. Promontory is the kind of high land just off the sea coast. So lady whose shrine stands on the promontory, pray for all those who are in the ships, those whose business has to do with fish, those who are going off to the sea on a voyage. Oh, lady, please save them. And then repeat a prayer also on the behalf. She is asked as it is a kind of intercession on behalf of these human beings. Mary will pray to God. So repeat a prayer also on behalf of women who have seen their sons or husbands setting forth, because they may not come back. So also you pray for the voyagers, for the fishermen who are going to the sea. You pray also for the women whose sons and husbands are going there. Maybe they will not return. And then also for those who were in ships, not only those who are going, but those who were in the ships also, pray for them. Now, so we can come to the last quartet, Little Gidding. Now, Little Gidding is again a small village in Huntingdonshire. It was visited by Eliot in 1936. It was the seat of an Anglican religious community established in 1625 by Nicholas Farrer. Anglican religious community, there was a small church there, but during the Civil War in England, the 17th century, between Charles I and the Parliament Party, for instance, this church was destroyed because Charles I visited this shrine 3 times, and he, took shelter also there. Now, this Little Gidding, for instance, particularly this chapel which was there, is a kind of spiritual symbol to the Rose Garden, spiritual symbol like the Rose Garden in Burnt Norton. There, when you come, what you can do? You are here to kneel, where prayer has been valid. This is a place where you can pray. You have to kneel down, and prayer is more than order of words. The conscious of the praying mind, or the sound of the voice praying. The communication of the dead is tongue with fire beyond the language of the living. They can teach us that prayer ultimately, this kind of, because they had that experience of the intersection of the timeless moment. So this is, and the last line says this here, the intersection of the timeless moment is England and nowhere. Now look here, this is the place where again we can have an experience of the timeless and experience of the union with God, this church here, because you see, this place was a holy place there. Here prayer would be valid, and actually perhaps this church can be an access to the, to the poet as well as to all men who will visit here. You need not come here in the first part as a tourist, or not to prepare a report. Here, England and nowhere. England and nowhere means here does not mean only in this place can you have this kind of access to the, to the point of intersection. Nowhere. Nowhere is the convergence of the timeless with the time can take place anywhere. But now here, when you have visited here, you can have this kind of experience. And the part 2 of this section is a kind of, again, composed of various kinds of references to the earlier 3 quartets. You see, ash on old man's sleeve is all the ash burnt roses sleeve. Now, burnt roses refers to the burnt cotton. Then this it refers to the East Poker, and then the dry salvages, the third stanza of this section. You see, in this way it goes on a little bit, and finally you see, and there is a kind of dialogue between this ghost and the poet. I met one walking, loitering on hurried as if blown towards me like the metal lips. Now, a dead master, he refers to, I caught the sudden look and encountered this dead master, whom I had known, forgotten, half recalled, both one and many. Now, one and many, that figure can be a composite master. He represents not only just one figure, but many of his teachers. But since he's a master, this relationship can be a relationship between master and pupil, teacher and pupil. And what did this ghost say? You see, this is the speaker. He said, what, are you there? I said, the wonder that I feel is easy, yet ease is cause of wonder. Therefore speak, I may not comprehend, I may not remember. Then he says, the ghostly figure, the dead master, I am not eager to rehearse my thought and theory which you have forgotten. These things have served their purpose, let them be. So with your own, and pray they be forgiven by others, as I pray to forgive both good and bad. Now, he is teaching the poet that you have to, again, as he said in the earlier quartet, waiting. You have to wait. You need not expect the fruits of your action. Let last season's fruit is eaten, and the full-fed beast shall kick the empty pail. Whatever you achieved in the last season, the fruit has already been eaten. So that will now be thrown away. But last year's words belong to last year's language. It is always changing. Next year's words await another voice. So, you have to wait. You have to find out new ways. Since our concern is speech, this kind of speech that is as if, he is talking about poetry, and speech impelled us to purify the dialect of the tribe and urge the mind to aptesight and foresight. Let me disclose the gifts reserved for age, etc. Now, the poet's duty, one of the duties of the poet is to purify the dialect of the tribe, because the words that he used to describe one kind of experience ultimately has become obsolete. So there are new experiences, new suffering, new problems, new material. So he has to use new words. So in this way, you have to purify the dialect of the dialect. We find he's saying that unless you do this, from wrong to wrong, the exasperated spirit proceeds, unless restored by that refining fire. Now, this refining fire refers to the purgatorial fire, where you must move in measure like a dancer. Now, the day is breaking, the fire is here now in England, and you see, this is the important thing. If you think of the future, if you go on without purifying yourself, you will only move from fire to fire. From wrong to wrong, the exasperated spirit proceeds. So you need to purify yourself so that you can ultimately have an experience of the timelessness. And then in the third section, he speaks of the three conditions of man. One is attachment. It says attachment to self and to things of persons, detachment from self and from things and from persons and growing between them indifference. So these are the three conditions in human life. One is attachment to earthly things, and then detachment and indifference to life altogether. But then attachment ultimately will not do. It may be good, but it will not release us. It will not give us liberation. And indifference, obviously, this is the heart of darkness. We have to forget about that. Detachment, action with detachment can only give us liberation. This is what he is saying. For liberation, not less not of love, but expanding of love beyond desire, and so liberation from the future as well as of the past. Now, if we have to have liberation from the past, that is, you see, the past actually is our attachment through memory. So we have to forget about that. And from the future, future is always connected to us through our desire, through our expectations. We cannot get liberation by attachment. So attachment has to be sacrificed, and ultimately we have to proceed with detachment. We have to act in our daily life, no doubt, but with detachment. And only with detachment, ultimately, we can become, as he said, to become renewed, transfigured in another pattern. And then there is a beautiful line here. He says, sin is behovely. Behovely is an old expression, it's inevitable, but all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. Now, this is how it ends with a kind of hope. Here, since Little Gidding refers to the civil war in England of the 17th century, here is also a reference to that. He says, united in strife which divided them. If I think of a king at nightfall, that is Charles I came here, of 3 men and more, the various characters in the civil war who were hanged by the parliamentary party on the scaffold, and a few who died forgotten in other places here and abroad, and of one who died blind and quiet, refers to Milton. Another Milton was on the other side, on the side of the parliament. So he refers to these figures, King Charles, Charles I, then some of his followers, and then Milton, who was on the opposite side, was an enemy of the king. So why should we celebrate these dead men more than the dying? What is the use of history? What is the significance of history? Why are he referring to this? Although he is referring to the 17th century civil war in England, you see, when Eliot wrote this poem in 1942, the Second World War was going on. There were air raids, etc. There were some references to the bombing of London. We cannot read all those lines here, but the reference to the war, the Second World War, as well as to the civil war in England is there. So ultimately what he asked is that why should we remember those things? What is the significance of the past? What is the significance of history? Now, history, as he said, can purify, and ultimately, as you see, he says, and are folded in a single party. Look, there were enemies. The king and Milton were both enemies with each other, but after death, you see, ultimately they died, and they were enfolded in a single party by the purificatory, power of history. History can teach us that ultimately there will be no enmity. So only thing is that we have to purify ourselves, our thoughts, our actions. And then in the fourth part, which is almost the climax of the poem, here he refers to, again, prayer refers to the Holy Ghost. The dove descending breaks the air with flame of incandescent terror. The dove, that is the Holy Ghost, is the Holy Ghost is compared to a kind of aeroplane, which is coming down to drop a bomb almost. But with flame of incandescent fire. But this fire is totally different. This flame is totally different, of which the tongues declare the one discharged from sin and error. Now, the Holy Ghost, through his fire, can discharge us from our sin and error. The only hope or only despair lies in choice of fire and fire, to be redeemed from fire and fire. Look, here the two terms are repeated, fire of fire. That either we can be burned in the burning of hell. The two fires are either the fire of hell or the fire of purgatory. So it is our choice. Either we can burn in the fire of hell, and if we choose the fire of purgatory, then obviously we'll be purified. So yes, the hope lies only in our choice. Who then devised the torment of love? Torment? Love. Love. You see, Holy Ghost as love can rescue us. Love is the unfamiliar name behind the hands that, he gives a completely Christian meaning here. Holy Ghost behind the hands that owe the intolerable salt flame which human power cannot remove. Here is a reference to, you see, Hercules. Hercules, his wife, was misinformed, and she gave Hercules a shard of flame, so that, you know, so that his love, that is Hercules' love for Deianeira, can be permanent, can be unending. But when, in order to escape this sort of flame, ultimately Hercules killed himself by burning in a fire. So, you see, that is what is referred to here. Love can burn us, name behind the hands and owe the intolerable sort of flame. This is a sort of flame. That is what we have to wear. This sort of flame refers to the purgatorial fire. We have to purify in this fire, which human power cannot remove, but God has given us this fire. So we only suspire. Suspire is breathing, consumed by either fire or fire. So this is what finally he says, we have to make a choice, either of hellfire or of purgatorial fire. If we can purify ourselves with the hellfire, then obviously the Holy Ghost as love can redeem us. That was the ultimately beginning in Bernd Norton. He started with that question: how time can be redeemed, how human beings can be redeemed, etc. So this is how we can be redeemed. Then the final section of the Bernd Norton, Little Gidding, we will find a kind of recapitulation. He has taken images, themes from all the earlier three quartos as well as the earlier part of Little Gidding, and there is a kind of, a conclusion where he says, all manner of things shall be well, all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well when the tongues of flame are enfolded into the crowned knot of fire, and the fire and the rose are one. Fire and the rose, that earlier symbol, the rose and the fire will be one, and then all shall be well. This is the kind of, philosophical meditation that Eliot presents in 4 quartets. I know this is very sketchy, because this is a very long poem and very difficult to compress it within one lecture. But I think you can have a kind of outline of the main ideas, go to the text, read it in details, and maybe you will be able to get the complete meaning. Thank you very much. And now if you have any question, please.
Thank you, sir. Sir, this is Shobuj Sarkar.
Yes.
Thank you, sir, for your illuminating and very significant lecture, because I was listening since beginning till now. And actually a text like this that is very paradoxical for students and also a bit abstruse, but you have tried your best to clear all those difficult areas, and I'm sure students are really will be helpful for this long and clear cut, and the way you have elaborated all each and every aspects of the poem Four Quartets. Thank you so much, sir, from our part. So before allowing the students their queries to you, I am curious a bit to ask a very straight, direct question. Sir, what would be your opinion that T.S. Eliot chose a topic like this? Was it for his growing age? As we see in the case of John Donne also. John Donne remained a very favorite poet of T.S. Eliot's motivation and influence. So John Donne also wrote some Hollywood sonnets or poems to the farewell like this. So choosing a topic like this journey, this metaphor of unity and time purgation, does age matter, sir, in that case?
Yes, of course. I mean, here also, I find I can refer to you to the last part of East Cocker, the last few lines of East Cocker. There, you see, Eliot says, old men ought to be explorers. Here and there does not matter. We must be still and still moving into another intensity for a further union, a deeper communion through the dark cold and the empty desolation, the wave cry, the wind cry, the vast waters of the petrol and the porpoise. In my end is my beginning. So age, obviously, works on him, particularly after his conversion. He, in a way, was looking back to his earlier poetic works, like the Westland, the Holomin, Prufrock, etc. He was mostly, speaking about the kind of pessimistic view of the world. Now, the conversion gave him a kind of hope, sort of assurance. Of course, the conversion does not make him a saint. He had to do all his daily works, but he was a kind of practicing Christian. You see, he went to the church regularly. He attended morning prayers, and every Sunday the mass, etc. So yes, old age made him turn to religion, made him turn to the deeper significances of life. And as he says, old men ought to be explorers, as his ancestors. Here also he's referring to his ancestors who went to America. They were explorers. Here and there does not matter whether, you see, they went to America, but Eliot came back to East Cocker here. So here and there does not matter. After all, we have to explore the deeper meanings of our existence. And indeed, he attempted to do that in his writings. Yes, it gave him. So you see, he belonged to a family which were believers, members of his family were believers in kind of Unitarian church, members of the Unitarian church. Now, Unitarian, as you know, they don't believe in the concept of Trinity. They believe most individualism and individual responsibility. They did not regard Christ as God. So these things created a kind of mental pressure on him. He wanted to have a kind of ritual, to be part of the ritual, because ritual, pattern, so prayer, all these things perhaps can give him a sort of peace of mind. I would say his earlier life, particularly his conjugal life, his past marriage was very disturbed, and there were other. He himself experienced a kind of nervous breakdown before writing the Westland. So yes, he thought that religion can give him peace of mind, and that is what he, I think, attempted this kind of religious poem.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. So now, sir, our students are ready with their questions for you. And here is Gargi Hembam, and she has typed her question in the chat box, sir. In your opinion, is the Four Quartets an optimistic poem or pessimistic one? Sir, please, for your help, if you just follow the chat box, we have the first question from our student, Gargi Hembram.
Of course, it is an optimistic poem. He has, you see, left behind the world of the Westland. He has clear, say, vision of, as he says here, the intersection of the time with the timelessness, the convergence of the time and the timelessness. That is daily life. Time will mean what? Life in this world, life in time. So, you see, he has experienced these kinds of illuminations. Life in time can be, you see, made meaningful by a vision of the timelessness or a vision of the God. Timelessness will mean God in ordinary terms. So he has complete faith in Virgin Mary and her intercession or prayer. He has complete faith in Christ, the Son, Christ, the Holy Ghost, and he believes that, you see, through our purgatorial suffering, if we choose purgatorial suffering, then maybe consciously if we choose religion, then obviously we will have peace of mind, we will have serenity. Through discipline, through observance, through prayer, we can have peace of mind. So it is clearly a very optimistic poem, that is to say.
Yes. So we have another student also, Madhurya Dotto, and but you have already said a lot on this issue. My question is, how does Aliah define time and permanence in Four Quartets? You have already discussed on the topic.
Time and permanence.
Yes.
Time and permanence.
Time and permanence in Four Quartets.
I think yes, although I did not spend much time on the first few lines of Burnt Norton, where he discusses this thing, time present and time past are both perhaps, present in time future. Now, this is actually, I told about Heraclitus's idea, you see, of the transmutation of the elements. And the Christian idea of time is that time in God, in the mind of God, exists as a simultaneity. That we human beings divide time as past, present, future. Of course, they are linked because time past is not just past, is not forgotten. You see, the past is connected to the present through our memory. We have memories of the past. Similarly, future is also connected to the present through our expectations. So although we do not have yet an experience of the future, but our expectations connect the future to our past. So time past, time present, and time future are in a way linked. As Eliot says, time present and time past are both perhaps present in time future. But then he also speaks of another thing, that is what might have been. Not only what has happened, but he also, or what will happen, or what is happening, he also speaks of what might have been. What might have been is a kind of possibility, you see. But then, as Eliot suggests, that in God's mind, you see, all these things exist simultaneously. So might have been also, although in our calculation, in our mind, it is merely a possibility, it did not happen, but it exists in God consciousness also as a possibility, as an actuality. Maybe it was not made to be actual in this world, but God has not forgotten that possibility. So yes, in our life, it is experienced as a sort of, flux, as movement, as change. But then in God's mind, you see, it is timelessness, permanence. So if we can ultimately realize, the nature of God, then also we can understand the meaning of the permanence of time, the timelessness, the concept of timelessness. I think that is what is that is what Eliot is saying, at least in this.
Yes, sir. So we have also yes.
Exactly.
Thank you, sir. So we have Choton Mondol, our 4th semester student, who has a different kind of question. What does actually mean by, and he quotes, all shall be well? What does actually mean by all shall be well, unquote, question mark? Does it mean earthly life will over, or human being will be able to overcome the post-war anxiety and will be able to connect with God by prayer? So that was the question from Choton Mondol.
All will be well means that, in our life, particularly in each of the quartets, in the third section, third movement of all the quartets, Eliot describes life on this earth. It is a place of disaffection. Our life is almost meaningless. We are running after futility. These kinds of the earthly life without an experience of the timelessness of God, without an experience of the God, is almost meaningless, almost futile. As he, gives a kind of parallel to words and the poetic form. Words, unless it is given a form, moves around without any kind of with a connection, and it is meaningless. So similarly, unless we connect ourselves with the timelessness, with God's time, or rather God's timelessness, our life is meaningless. So if we can do that, if we can, transfigure the temporal life in time with the experience of the divine, then, our life will be meaningful and all will be well. All manner of things will be well. That is what Eliot is suggesting here. We need to transfigure our experiences, earthly experiences, with our, realization of the timelessness of God, with the divine experience, divine realization, rather, I would say. Now, this can be achieved, Eliot has suggested, by two ways. One is that there is a sudden illumination, but that is very rare, and that cannot be also sustained. But another way is the saint's way. Although we are not saints, but in our life, we can practice prayer. We can, practice discipline. We can perform all the rituals as is taught by the church, as taught by Christ. Then only, all things will be well. That is what he is trying to suggest here.
Yes,
I think, yes, it satisfies the question. Okay, any more questions?
Sir, we have Gaurav Guho. Gaurav Guho has put his question. At some points, the speaker seems like he's really into Eastern religions like Buddhism and Hinduism. At other points, he seems all about Jesus. What religious outlook do you think the speaker endorses in this work?
As you know, Eliot read Sanskrit and Indian philosophy or Hindu philosophy as well as Buddhist philosophy in Harvard University when he was a student there. And yes, he was a devout Christian after his conversion, practicing Christian, no doubt. But then he has a versatile mind. You see, he read all these philosophies, both Eastern philosophies as well as Christian philosophy or Western philosophy. It is not only the question of Christianity and Hinduism or Buddhism. He here talks about Heraclitus. He talks about Aristotle. You see, and the rose garden which is also, as I said, is a very common image in, say, Islamic mysticism. David Ward, in his book T.S. Eliot Between Two Worlds, gives a lot of examples from Persian poetry where rose garden is a common familiar symbol in Islamic mysticism, mystic poetry. And that is what he is saying here in the first book, the first quatrain, Burnt Not On, he says, my words echo thus in your mind. So yes, he is talking about Christianity, talking about Hinduism, create echoes, similarities with those who believe in different kinds of religious philosophy or otherwise, you see, Greek philosophy, etc. So it's not that, he is a Christian, no doubt, but in order to explain his Christian ideas, he takes the help of Hindu philosophy, what Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, or the Buddhism. Many, papers are there, the relevance of Buddhist ideas in the four quartets. So if he finds a parallel between Christian philosophy and Hinduism or other religions, then he takes the help of that in order to make it not just say Christian poem, but a kind of religious poem which will create echo in the minds of those who believe in other religions, other faiths. So his religious philosophy is very eclectic. This term eclecticism is applied to Eliot. He chooses from different sources. Wherever he finds it is useful, eclectically, he chooses it. He's not very much, limited to narrow belief, only Christian theology. His religious, his religious attitude or religious faith. Yes, it is very much eclectic, although he is, as I said, deeply devoted to his Anglo-Catholic faith. He was an Anglo-Catholic. He does not think that he cannot take the help of Hinduism or Buddhism or other philosophical or theological ideas in order to express his poetry. It shows the breadth of his mind, breadth of his reading, breadth of his meditation, thinking, contemplation. Yes, I think this is why, he refers to all these religious ideas. Okay?
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, sir, since there is no more question from our students, so we can come to an end to this session, sir. And thank you once again from us. Thank you for giving us time in spite of your busy schedule. And we shall be in touch with you once again. So, sir, thank you.
It is a pleasure. I have to very hurriedly go through all the four quartets. As you can understand, this is such a, deep, complicated book that one lecture cannot do justice to these complex ideas. But yes, as I said, I have just tried to give you a sort of outline so that you will study further, and maybe it will give you some sort of hints, some sort of help to understand four quartets in a much more completer way. Thank you very much.
Cheers, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.